The quiet hum of the old refrigerator was the loudest sound in the house these days. Sometimes, I'd swear it was mocking me, a constant, low thrum against the vast silence that had swallowed my life whole. It had been 6 months since Mama passed, almost a year since Papa. Their absence hung in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam, visible but untouchable, a perpetual ache behind my ribs. I was 60, a retired carpenter. My hands still knew the grain of wood better than they knew peace. Here in Flagstaff, surrounded by the familiar scent of pine and crisp mountain air, I felt more lost than I ever had on any unfamiliar highway. My only sister, Sarah, was practically a stranger. Our calls were infrequent, clipped, always ending with an unspoken tension. We spoke of practicalities, of probate and paperwork, never of memories, never of shared grief. She lived in Phoenix, a world away, and over the past decade, that distance had stretched beyond mere miles. Our childhood closeness had frayed, then snapped, leaving me bewildered. My parents, too, in their final years, had seemed different, distant. Their eyes would hold a look I couldn't quite decipher, a blend of pity and disappointment that cut me to the bone. I tried to reach out, tried to bridge the gap, but every effort felt like pushing against an invisible wall, leaving me exhausted and confused. I just didn't understand what I'd done wrong. The financial strain was another weight. The inheritance, what little there was tangled, complex, far less than I'd expected, and mostly tied up in legalities I couldn't grasp. It felt like another brick in the wall of my confusion, cementing the feeling that I was somehow less important, less loved, less deserving. The quiet ache was a constant companion, a dull throb of loneliness and a profound, bone-deep bewilderment at the fracturing of my family. It started, as most things do, with a flicker of hope disguised as something new. My brother, Mark, was always the charmer, the quick wit, the one who effortlessly commanded a room. He met Vivian at a corporate event, introduced her to us a few months later, and she swept into our lives like a desert wind, vibrant and undeniable. She was beautiful, undeniably so, with eyes that sparkled and a laugh that seemed to fill every empty space. She was a marketing executive, articulate and poised, and our parents adored her from the first moment. My sister Sarah, a year younger than Mark, quickly fell under her spell too, drawn to Vivian's glamorous stories and sophisticated ways. Me? I was the quiet one, the carpenter, the practical one. I like things solid, built to last. Vivian, for all her sparkle, felt ephemeral. Too good to be true, perhaps. My first impressions were a strange mix of admiration and a subtle unease, a gut feeling I couldn't quite place. She was incredibly attentive, almost excessively so. She'd ask probing questions about our family history, our dynamics, our shared jokes. She seemed so eager to belong, and yet, there was a meticulousness to it, like she was gathering data. I remember one Thanksgiving, a few months after she and Mark were engaged. I was telling a story about Mark and me as kids, a silly misadventure with a treehouse. Vivian interjected, her smile bright. "Oh, you mean that time Mark had to rescue you, Owen, from the rickety ladder?" She'd twisted it, just slightly, from Mark and I getting into trouble together to him being my rescuer. It was a minor thing, barely noticeable, but it left a sour taste. I felt a slight internal shift, a moment of being off balance. Another time, I mentioned a local charity I volunteered for, helping build ramps for the disabled. Vivian piped up, "How wonderful, Owen. So generous of you to spare a few hours from your hobbies." Hobbies? It was a significant commitment. Again, a subtle dismissal, a framing that diminished my efforts while still sounding complimentary. My family didn't seem to notice. They were captivated by her charm. I just wrote it off as my own quiet nature clashing with her more outgoing personality, or perhaps a touch of brotherly protectiveness clouding my judgment. But those little moments, like tiny splinters, started to accumulate under my skin. The shift was so gradual, so insidious, I barely noticed it until it had already taken root. It began with little things, subtle currents of change. My sister Sarah's calls became less frequent, her voice edged with a strange formality. When we did speak, the easy banter was gone, replaced by careful, almost stilted conversation. My parents, too, seemed to hold me at a slight remove. Visits to their house, once filled with laughter and easy conversation, began to feel like walking on eggshells. Their questions about my life seemed more like interrogations, less like genuine interest. I'd catch them exchanging glances, sometimes a sigh, when I spoke of my woodworking projects or my quiet life. Vivian, meanwhile, became an ever-present fixture. After Mark and she married, she seemed to take on a managerial role within the family, especially concerning my parents. She'd always be there, just a step to the side, when I spoke to them, interjecting with a "Don't you remember, Owen, you said you were going to sell that old truck last year," when I mentioned needing to buy some lumber, or a casual, "Oh, Owen's always been so focused on his own path, haven't you, dear?" If I expressed concern about my parents' declining health. Each comment, seemingly innocuous, had the effect of isolating me, making me feel slightly out of step, slightly selfish. Then came the financial pressures. Mark, under Vivian's guidance, had started a few ambitious but ultimately unsuccessful business ventures. There was a suggestion, first from Vivian, then echoed by my parents, that I might contribute to help Mark get on his feet. "You're retired, Owen," Vivian had said with a bright smile. "You have more flexibility with your assets. Mark just needs a little boost." I had a modest retirement fund, built carefully over decades of hard work. Lending a substantial sum was out of the question, and I politely declined, explaining my own financial planning. The look my parents gave me that day, a flicker of disappointment, a subtle hardening, stayed with me. It was the first time I felt truly judged by them. I started hearing things secondhand, through casual remarks from family friends or my elderly aunt. A comment from Vivian about Owen needing to get his act together, or how Mark and I were always helping out mother and father, unlike some. I would be told, "Vivian said you were too busy for the family picnic," when I had never even been invited, or "It's good that Vivian is looking after your parents' investments since you're not really savvy with those things." Each instance left me bewildered, a knot of confusion and hurt tightening in my gut. I would replay conversations in my head, trying to pinpoint where I had gone wrong, where I had given anyone the impression that I was uncaring or incompetent. I began to question my own memory, my own intentions. The foundation of my world, my family, felt like it was slowly, subtly shifting beneath my feet, leaving me psychologically off balance and constantly trying to catch up. The true destabilization began after Mark died. It was sudden, an aneurysm, taking him from us far too young. The grief was immense, a raw, gaping wound in our family. But even in that tragedy, Vivian managed to cement her control. She stepped in, immediately, to handle everything. She orchestrated the funeral with meticulous precision, fielding condolences, managing arrangements, presenting herself as the grieving widow who was also the strong one, the one holding the family together. I remember trying to offer solace to Sarah, to my parents, but Vivian always seemed to intercept me. If I tried to sit with my mother, Vivian would gently guide me away, saying, "Mother needs quiet right now. Owen, she's so fragile. Perhaps you can help with the catering arrangements?" Directing me to a task, rather than allowing me to simply be with my grieving parent. My carpentry skills, once a source of quiet pride and utility within the family, became another target. My parents' old house needed a new porch, a project I'd been planning to start for them for months. I offered, as I always had, to do the work, to pay for materials, to give them a solid, safe structure. Vivian, with a pitying smile, interjected, "Oh, Owen, that's so sweet of you, but we really couldn't impose. You know your back hasn't been the same since that fall, and we wouldn't want you straining yourself." She turned to my parents. "I've already called a professional contractor. He'll be here next week to give an estimate. It's better that way, less pressure on Owen." My parents, their faces etched with grief, looked at me with a hint of accusation, as if I was the one declining, the one shirking my filial duty. That look, that slight tilt of their head that implied disappointment, it seared itself into my memory. It was the profound sense of being erased, of my presence being not just unneeded, but actively unwelcome, that truly began to break me. The inheritance talks, after Mark's death, became frequent, with Vivian as the primary intermediary. She began subtly pushing for specific arrangements regarding my parents' wills and assets, always framed as what Mark would have wanted, or simplifying things for mother and father. She spoke of consolidating assets, of trusts, of ensuring stability. When I raised concerns about certain clauses or the lack of transparency, she dismissed me. Owen, you don't understand these complex financial instruments. Vivian is an expert. She knows what's best. My sister Sarah, seemingly convinced by Vivian's persuasive arguments, echoed her sentiments. It's for their peace of mind, Owen. Don't be difficult. I was branded as greedy, as not understanding, as always making things harder. The profound sense of isolation became a constant ache. I watched my own family turn away from me, one by one, seemingly for no reason. I suffered in quiet agony, unable to articulate the invisible pressure I felt, the strange sense of being suffocated by kindness, by concern, by a smile that never quite reached Vivian's eyes. Mama passed a few months after Papa. Their deaths were close, almost as if one couldn't bear to be without the other. The grief was immense, a heavy shroud draped over my heart. But it was compounded, almost unbearable, by the gaping chasm between me and my sister and the persistent, gnawing confusion over my parents' last years. Their house, now truly empty, felt cold, a mausoleum of lost laughter and unspoken words. It was my duty, as the remaining son, to sort through their belongings, a task I approached with a heavy heart, not just for the practicalities of an estate, but to cling to every last tangible memory of them. I moved through the room slowly, each item a silent echo of a life lived. Papa's pipe, Mama's knitting basket, the worn armchair where they'd read the newspaper together. In Mama's study, a small, meticulously organized room she used for her correspondence and hobbies, I found myself drawn to an old mahogany writing desk. It was sturdy, beautiful, one of the first pieces I'd helped Papa build as a boy. My fingers traced the intricate carvings on its legs. I remembered Mama telling me once there was a secret drawer, a tiny hidden compartment Papa had built just for her. I'd never found it, despite years of searching. Now, almost on instinct, my hand reached under the lip of the desk, feeling for a faint ridge. A click. A narrow panel slid open. Inside, tucked away, were two items that would shatter my world. The first was a small bundle of letters, tied with faded blue ribbon. My name was on them, my old Flagstaff address, but they'd clearly been opened. A few were even marked "Return to Sender," with Vivian's familiar, elegant script on the back. As I read them, my blood ran cold. They were letters I had written to my parents over the years, cheerful updates about my life, photos of my latest woodworking projects, invitations to visit, and scattered throughout the bundle, attached to some, were short, sharp notes in Vivian's handwriting. Owen trying to borrow money again. Another one of Owen's self-pitying letters. He just wants to complain about Mark. The return letters were ones I had sent after my parents had passed, messages of love and grief to Sarah, trying to connect. Vivian had clearly intercepted them, forging the "Return to Sender" mark to make me think my sister didn't want to hear from me. My breath hitched in my throat. The second item was a small, leather-bound diary, its pages filled with Mama's familiar, elegant script. But the writing wasn't straightforward. It was coded, small symbols interspersed with words, little drawings next to dates. Mama had always loved puzzles, a habit she'd picked up from her days as a cryptographer during the war. It took me days, huddled in that silent house, poring over old family photos, childhood notes, anything that might give me a clue to her private language. I found it, finally, in a faded picture of a sunflower, a small symbol drawn next to it. A key. The entries, once deciphered, hit me like physical blows. Each word was a hammer strike, shattering the fragile narrative I had built for myself. They documented a meticulous, decades-long campaign of manipulation orchestrated by Vivian. It began subtly, as I remembered, but intensified over the years. Mama had written of Vivian reporting on my supposed selfishness. Vivian said Owen told Mark he wouldn't help him with his medical bills, even though he has plenty saved. That was a lie. I had offered Mark help countless times, and he'd always declined, saying Vivian was handling it. Vivian said Owen complained about coming to Christmas dinner, that we were too much trouble. Another lie. Christmas was sacred to me. Owen always trying to borrow money from your father. Vivian says he never pays it back. A searing, painful lie. I had never once asked my parents for money. The entries painted a portrait of me as irresponsible, greedy, ungrateful, and emotionally distant. Vivian's fabrications were designed to alienate me, to poison my parents' and Sarah's perceptions. Then came the entries about the inheritance. Mama had documented Vivian's suggestions about the will, her insistence on specific clauses, her constant badgering about streamlining their assets. There were mentions of legal documents being presented by Vivian for their signatures, documents Mama hadn't fully understood, but had trusted Vivian to explain. Vivian assures us this is what Mark wanted, for his legacy to be protected through her. Mama had even noted Vivian's insistence on being the sole executor of Mark's estate, and later, her strong suggestion that she should manage a substantial portion of Mama and Papa's assets for efficiency, essentially diverting what should have been a straightforward inheritance for Sarah and me. The horror of it all washed over me. Not just the emotional abuse, the years of quiet suffering, but the sheer, cold-blooded avarice. My world tilted. My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and a wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm me. The silence of the house pressed in, no longer mocking, but deafening, filled only with the sound of my own ragged breaths and the echoing screams of a truth long buried. The initial shock gave way to a profound, bone-deep ache, unlike any grief I had known. Days blurred into a fog of rereading, retracing, reliving. I sat in Mama's study, surrounded by the ghosts of her meticulously recorded lies, the evidence of Vivian's deceit. My chest felt hollowed out, my lungs struggling to draw air. The betrayal wasn't just Vivian's. It was the betrayal of all those years, of the love I thought I'd lost, of the family bonds that had withered and died in the shadow of a lie. To know my parents, in their final moments, had carried those fabricated notions of my selfishness, my apathy, my unworthiness. That was the cruelest cut of all. I cried until my eyes were raw, tears not just for Mama and Papa, but for the son and brother I had thought I was, the man who had been systematically erased and rewritten by Vivian's poisonous pen. For a time, I felt utterly lost, adrift in a sea of despair. The quiet ache that had been my constant companion exploded into a symphony of torment. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My hands, once so steady, trembled. My mind, once so practical, reeled. But then, slowly, something shifted. A flicker of something hard and bright ignited in the wreckage. It wasn't my fault. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the bad son, the ungrateful brother. Vivian was the monster. She had stolen years. She had stolen peace. She had stolen relationships. And she would not steal my truth. The fog began to lift, replaced by a cold, righteous anger that solidified into grim determination. I started small, methodically. First, I compiled every piece of evidence. The letters, the diary, copies of the legal documents Vivian had managed for my parents. I found those in a separate, less hidden folder, testament to her overconfidence. I cross-referenced dates, phrases, discrepancies. I built a case, not just for a lawyer, but for myself, for the part of me that still doubted, still wondered if it was all some terrible misunderstanding. My next step was terrifying, reaching out to Sarah. It felt like walking into a minefield. I called her, my voice rougher than usual. I didn't hint at the truth directly, not yet. I just said, Sarah, I found some things. About Mama and Papa. About the estate. I think we need to talk. Properly. I think you need to see this. Her initial response was guarded, tinged with the familiar impatience. Owen, what now? I'm busy. Can't you just send the documents to the lawyer? I pushed back, gently but firmly. No, this isn't just about documents. This is about everything. Please. For Mama and Papa. Her silence was long, fraught, but finally, she agreed. Fine, but it better be important. I knew then that this wasn't just about the money, or even just the truth. This was about reclaiming my family, about waking them up, no matter the cost. I scheduled a family meeting, inviting Sarah and our elderly Aunt Carol, who had also seemed subtly estranged from me over the years, carefully omitting Vivian from the initial invitation list. This had to be done right, and it had to start with my family hearing my side, the real side, first. The air in my parents' living room was thick, suffocating. I had invited Sarah and Aunt Carol a day before I intended to confront Vivian, wanting them to hear the truth without her manipulative presence clouding their judgment. Sarah sat stiffly on the sofa, her arms crossed, her expression wary. Aunt Carol, frail but sharp, watched me with an unsettling stillness. I placed the evidence on the coffee table, the bound letters, the deciphered diary, copies of the suspicious legal documents. My hands, despite my resolve, trembled slightly. I know this is difficult, I began, my voice raspy. But there's something you both need to see. Something I found in Mama's desk. I started with the letters, handing them the opened envelopes, the return to sender, marks clearly visible. Sarah's eyebrows furrowed, confusion giving way to a dawning comprehension. These are yours, she whispered, from after Mama died. I never got these. Then I opened the diary. I read passages aloud, my voice cracking at times, detailing Vivian's fabricated stories, her insidious reports of my supposed failings, her careful planting of doubt. I watched Sarah's face drain of color, her initial skepticism crumbling into horror. Aunt Carol gasped, a small, choked sound. Vivian said. Vivian said Owen was always so selfish, always ignoring his parents. She murmured, her eyes wide with shock. The weight of their past accusations, the pain of their estrangement, hung in the air, a silent testament to Vivian's cruel artifice. By the time I showed them the legal documents, highlighting the suspicious clauses and the subtle diversions of funds, Sarah was openly weeping, a hand clapped over her mouth. She made me believe you were trying to bleed them dry, Owen, she choked out. She said you were just after their money. The truth shattered them, revealing years of carefully cultivated lies. It was agonizing to witness their pain, but also a profound relief. The wall was finally coming down. The next day, the true climax unfolded. Vivian arrived, breezy and composed, expecting a discussion about the final estate distribution. Sarah and Aunt Carol were already there, their faces pale, their eyes red-rimmed but resolute. I cut straight to it, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Vivian, I said, we need to talk about the truth. I laid out the evidence again, systematically, methodically. The intercepted letters, the decoded diary entries, the discrepancies in the legal documents that pointed to undue influence and fraud. Vivian's mask slipped, then shattered. Initially, she feigned shock, then indignation. How dare you, Owen? This is ludicrous. A fabrication. You're just bitter and greedy. Her voice rose, shrill and unhinged. But as I continued, her carefully constructed persona began to crack. Her eyes darted between Sarah and Aunt Carol, seeing the undeniable evidence of her betrayal reflected in their faces. Then, the dam broke. She launched into a furious tirade, her face contorted with rage. You always had it easy, Owen, the golden boy, the beloved carpenter. Mark deserved better than this family, better than you. I sacrificed everything for him, for them. She gestured wildly. And what did I get? Scraps. You think I haven't seen the way they favored you? The way they indulged Mark? I deserved more. I worked for it. I meticulously planned this for decades to secure what was rightfully ours, what Mark and I built, not for you to squander. Her voice cracked on the admission, her carefully cultivated facade crumbling into a heap of raw resentment and predatory avarice. She didn't just admit it. She almost gloated, her twisted sense of victory briefly shining through her rage. It was sickening, horrifying, and utterly liberating. The silence that followed Vivian's confession was deafening, broken only by Sarah's soft sobs and Aunt Carol's shaking breaths. Vivian, having revealed her true self, stormed out, a venomous glare her final offering. The emotional collapse that followed for Sarah and Aunt Carol was profound. Weeks of sorrow, regret, and anger. They mourned not just my parents anew, but the years of lost connection, the blindness that had allowed Vivian to twist their perceptions. The inheritance, tangled in legal battles against Vivian for fraud, undue influence, and emotional abuse, became a secondary concern. The true wealth, the real inheritance, was the painful, slow process of truth and reconciliation. Sarah and I began to talk, truly talk, for the first time in over a decade. Long, tearful conversations where we untangled Vivian's lies, piecing together the true timeline of her manipulations. We shared our grief, our shame, our anger. She apologized profusely for her suspicion, for her distance, for not seeing through Vivian's act. I apologized for not pushing harder, for not realizing the depth of the deception sooner. Our bond, once fractured, began to mend, stronger now for having survived such a destructive force. Aunt Carol, too, found a measure of peace and understanding. She moved in with Sarah, and their shared experience became a foundation for their own renewed relationship. My transformation was slow but profound. The crushing burden of unexplained estrangement, the quiet ache of loneliness, lifted. I understood now. My parents hadn't abandoned me. They had been masterfully manipulated. Their love for me hadn't died. It had been suffocated by lies. That knowledge, though bittersweet for the lost years, brought a deep, abiding peace. I started rebuilding my family connections, not just with Sarah and Aunt Carol, but with distant cousins and friends I had withdrawn from. I found new purpose in my woodworking, crafting pieces with renewed joy, each chisel stroke a quiet affirmation of resilience. My hands, once symbols of my quiet isolation, now felt like tools of connection. The legal battles are ongoing, and the inheritance remains tied up, but in the grand scheme of things, it barely registers. What I received was far more valuable: my truth, my peace, and my family. I sit here now, in my quiet Flagstaff home, the hum of the refrigerator no longer mocking, but a gentle background hum to a life rebuilt. The air still carries the scent of pine, but it also carries the quiet strength of liberation. The past aches, yes, a scar on the heart, but it no longer defines me. I am Owen, the carpenter, the son, the brother, and I am finally free.